Have you ever looked at your life and quietly wondered, how did I end up feeling so lost when I tried so hard to do everything right? Not the kind of question you ask out loud. The kind that visits you when nobody is around. The kind that follows you into the morning and sits beside you at night. Because something feels off. And maybe you can't even explain it. You smile when you're supposed to smile. You keep going because that's what everyone expects. But deep inside, something feels empty. Something feels missing. And the hardest part is that you don't know when it happened. You just know that the excitement isn't there anymore. The energy isn't there. The certainty isn't there. You watch other people moving forward, building careers, starting families, chasing dreams. And somehow, you feel like you're standing still. Like everyone received instructions for life except you. And slowly, a dangerous thought begins to grow. Maybe you're the problem. Maybe you're falling behind. Maybe everyone else has figured it out. But what if that thought is a lie? What if the reason you're hurting isn't because you're broken? What if it's because you've spent so long carrying expectations that were never truly yours? What if you've been trying to become who everyone wanted you to be, while losing sight of who you actually are? Because that pain you feel isn't weakness, it isn't failure, and it isn't proof that you've ruined your future. It's proof that something inside you refuses to settle for a life that no longer fits. Most people never talk about this. They hide it. They pretend everything is fine. They stay busy. They distract themselves. Anything to avoid facing the uncomfortable truth. But no amount of noise can silence what your heart already knows. Something has to change. Not because you're falling apart, but because you've outgrown the version of life you've been living. And maybe that's why you feel so tired. Not because you're lazy, not because you lack discipline, but because pretending becomes exhausting. Wearing masks becomes exhausting. Living according to everyone else's expectations becomes exhausting. And eventually, the soul starts whispering. At first, it's quiet, easy to ignore. But over time, the whisper becomes impossible to silence. Because deep down, you know. You know you're meant for something more than surviving each day. You know you're meant for something more than constantly questioning your worth. You know you're meant for something more than waking up and repeating the same emptiness over and over again. But here's what nobody tells you. Feeling lost is not the end of your story. Sometimes it's the moment your old story stops making sense. And that moment feels terrifying. Because uncertainty scares us. The human mind craves answers. It craves control. It craves guarantees. And when those things disappear, fear takes over. That's why being lost can feel so heavy. Not because you have no future, but because you can't see it yet. And not seeing the road ahead can make you believe there isn't one. But those are not the same thing. Just because you cannot see what's ahead doesn't mean your life has reached its limit. It simply means you're standing in a place where clarity hasn't arrived yet. And that's where so many people give up, not because they can't continue, but because they mistake confusion for failure. They mistake uncertainty for defeat. They mistake a season for a destiny. Don't make that mistake, because the truth is, some of the most important chapters in life begin in moments that feel exactly like this. Moments when nothing makes sense. Moments when the old answers stop working. Moments when you're forced to stop running and finally listen to yourself. So if you're sitting there wondering whether you've missed your chance, whether it's too late, whether you've somehow fallen too far behind, stay with this feeling. Not the fear, not the shame, the truth underneath it. Because the fact that you're searching means something inside you still believes there's more. And that small voice inside you, it's not your weakness, it's your hope. And hope has a way of surviving even when everything else feels uncertain. Because hope doesn't disappear. People do. People abandon themselves. They stop listening. They stop trusting. They convince themselves that the voice inside them is foolish, so they silence it. Not once, not overnight, but little by little. until one day they wake up and realize they no longer recognize the person staring back at them. And that's the tragedy. Not failing, not falling, not making mistakes. The real tragedy is spending your entire life becoming someone you never wanted to be. Most people don't lose themselves in a single moment. They lose themselves one compromise at a time, one dream postponed,
One fear obeyed, one truth ignored. And after years of doing what everyone expected, they wonder why they feel empty. Because you cannot betray yourself forever and expect peace. You cannot live according to everyone else's standards and expect fulfillment. And yet so many people do exactly that. They chase approval. They chase validation. They chase the image of success that the world keeps selling them. But approval is a moving target. No matter how much you achieve, someone will expect more. No matter how much you sacrifice, someone will still judge you. And if your happiness depends on pleasing everyone, you'll spend your life exhausted, trying, proving, performing, never arriving. Because you were never meant to live as a performance. You were meant to live as a person. And maybe that's why this feeling has become impossible to ignore. Because deep inside, you know you've been carrying dreams that don't belong to you, expectations that don't belong to you, fears that don't belong to you. And the weight of pretending has become too heavy. That's not a curse. That's a wake-up call. Because there comes a moment when surviving is no longer enough. A moment when your soul demands honesty. And honesty can be painful. Painful because it forces you to admit that some things you've chased never truly mattered. Painful because it forces you to admit that you've spent years waiting for permission, waiting for certainty, waiting for confidence, waiting for the perfect moment. But life keeps moving. Days become months, months become years. And time does not slow down for hesitation. It keeps going, with you or without you. And one day, the question changes. It stops being, what if I fail? And becomes, what if I never try? What if I spend the rest of my life wondering who I could have become? That question is heavier. Because regret grows quietly. It doesn't scream. It whispers. It visits people when the house is silent, When the distractions are gone. When they realize they traded their deepest desires for comfort. And comfort can become a prison. Not because it's painful, because it's familiar. People stay in unhappy lives because unhappy feels predictable. People stay stuck because stuck feels safe. People stay small because small feels comfortable. And comfort slowly convinces them that this is all life has to offer. But something inside you knows better. Otherwise, you wouldn't still be searching. You wouldn't still be hoping. You wouldn't still be fighting through the confusion. A part of you refuses to give up. Even after disappointment, even after heartbreak, even after plans fell apart. That part of you is still alive. And that's important. Because as long as that part survives, your story isn't finished. Not even close. You don't need to know every answer. You don't need to have your entire future figured out. Nobody does. The people you admire, they're not walking around with perfect certainty. They're simply moving, learning, adjusting, growing. And while everyone else waits for guarantees, they take the next step. Because clarity doesn't visit people who stand still forever. Clarity finds people who move, even slowly, even imperfectly, even afraid. And maybe fear has been running your life for too long. Maybe you've spent enough years doubting yourself. Maybe you've spent enough nights questioning your worth. Maybe you've spent enough time waiting for a version of yourself that feels ready. Because the truth is brutal. Ready is a feeling that rarely comes first. And if you keep waiting for it, you may spend your entire life waiting, while the life you were meant to live quietly slips through your fingers. And that's what makes this moment so important. Not because everything suddenly makes sense,
Not because the fear has disappeared, but because life is asking something from you. Not perfection, not brilliance.
Not certainty, just honesty. Real honesty. The kind that strips away excuses. The kind that forces you to stop blaming time, stop blaming circumstances, stop blaming the version of yourself that made mistakes. Because you are not standing where you are today because you failed too many times. You're standing here because somewhere along the way, you started believing that your life needed to make perfect sense before you could move. And that belief has been stealing years from people. People wait for confidence. People wait for inspiration. People wait for the perfect opportunity. And while they're waiting, life keeps writing chapters they never chose. Because waiting feels productive. It feels responsible. It feels wise. But sometimes waiting is just fear wearing a different mask. Fear saying not yet. Fear saying maybe later. Fear saying one more day. And those days become decades. That's how dreams disappear. Not with explosions, not with dramatic endings, but with delays. Tiny delays, repeated so many times that they become a lifestyle. And eventually people convince themselves that they never really wanted those dreams anyway. Not because it's true, because accepting regret feels easier than facing fear. But something inside you still remembers. It remembers the things that made you feel alive. It remembers the dreams you buried. It remembers the person you wanted to become before doubt started speaking louder than hope. That person isn't gone. That person has been waiting for you to stop seeking permission, waiting for you to stop comparing your timeline to everyone else's, waiting for you to stop treating your life like it's already over, because it isn't over. Read that in your heart. It isn't over. You are not too late. You are not disqualified. You are not forgotten. And you are not standing among the ruins of your life. You're standing in the middle of a decision most people avoid, the decision to begin again. Not from the beginning, but from experience, from wisdom, from scars, from lessons, from everything life has already taught you. Because broken dreams can teach, failures can teach, pain can teach, disappointment can teach, and sometimes the strongest people are not the ones who avoided suffering. They're the ones who refuse to let suffering have the final word. So stop measuring your worth by how quickly things happened. Stop punishing yourself because your path looks different. Stop believing that your delays are proof that you've been abandoned by life. Flowers bloom in different seasons. Mountains rise at different speeds, and people discover themselves at different times. There is no universal clock, no perfect schedule, no age where life suddenly guarantees understanding. Some people find direction early, others find it after losing everything. Others find it after years of confusion, but they find it. Not because they had special advantages.
Because they kept moving, they kept believing, even when they couldn't see the entire road. And maybe that's what courage really is. Not the absence of fear, but the refusal to surrender to it. Because fear will always have something to say. It will tell you that you're not ready. It will tell you that you're too old, too young, too broken, too far behind. It will create endless reasons to stay exactly where you are. And if you listen long enough, you'll spend your life protecting yourself from failure, while also protecting yourself from growth. Protecting yourself from disappointment, while also protecting yourself from possibility. Protecting yourself from pain, while also protecting yourself from becoming who you were meant to be. And one day, you'll realize something that changes everything. The greatest risk was never trying. The greatest risk was never failing.
The greatest risk was spending your entire life watching the clock move while convincing yourself that tomorrow would finally be the day. When deep down, you've always known. The life you're waiting for has been waiting for you too. And maybe that's the truth you've been running from. Not because it scares you, but because accepting it means you can no longer hide behind excuses.
Because once you realize that life is still waiting for your answer, something changes. You stop asking whether you're capable. You start asking whether you're willing. Willing to take a step without guarantees. Willing to trust yourself again. Willing to stop letting fear decide who you become. Because fear has already taken enough. It has stolen opportunities. It has stolen peace. It has stolen years. Years spent doubting. Years spent comparing. Years spent believing that somehow everyone else had access to a secret you never received. But there was never a secret. There was only movement.
There was only persistence. There was only the decision to keep going when quitting seemed easier. And that's what separates people. Not talent, not luck, not perfect timing. The willingness to continue. Because life has a strange way of rewarding people who refuse to abandon themselves. Not immediately, not magically, but gradually. One decision at a time, one habit at a time, one ordinary day at a time. And those small moments become something bigger. They become identity. Because every time you keep a promise to yourself, you change. Every time you rise after disappointment, you change. Every time you choose growth over comfort, you change. And one day, you look back and realize you became the person you once thought was impossible. Not overnight, but through thousands of moments nobody applauded. That's how transformation happens. Quietly, slowly, but powerfully. Which means you don't need to rebuild your entire life today. You don't need all the answers. You don't need to erase your past. You don't need to become someone else. You simply need to stop abandoning the person you already are. Because you've been fighting yourself for too long, trying to become perfect, trying to earn worth, trying to prove that you're enough. But worth was never something you had to earn. It was something you forgot. And maybe that's why this moment matters. Because you can spend the rest of your life trying to become worthy. Or you can finally realize that your value was never destroyed by your failures. Not by rejection. Not by mistakes. Not by lost time. Not by the chapters that didn't go according to plan. Life is bigger than broken plans. And you are bigger than your worst days. The voice in your head may remind you of everything that went wrong. But it rarely reminds you of everything you've survived. Everything you've endured, everything you've carried, everything you've overcome. You are still here, after all of it. After the disappointments, after the heartbreak, after the nights nobody knew about, after the moments when you thought you wouldn't make it, you're still here. And that means something. Because people who have truly lost are no longer searching. They no longer hope. But you're still listening. You're still fighting. You're still looking for meaning. And that means the story inside you is still alive. So don't make the mistake of confusing a difficult season with a hopeless future. Storms don't last forever. Neither do failures. Neither do moments of confusion. Everything changes. Everything moves. Including you. And maybe years from now, you'll look back on this season with tears in your eyes. Not because it was easy, but because it forced you to become someone stronger, someone wiser, someone more grateful, someone more real. And you'll realize that the days you thought were destroying you were actually shaping you, not to break you, but to prepare you. Because life has never demanded perfection from you. It has only asked for participation, to show up, to keep walking, to keep believing, to keep choosing hope when despair feels easier. And before this moment passes, before another week becomes another month, and another month becomes another year, hear this with everything inside you. You have delayed your dreams long enough. You have doubted yourself long enough. You have carried fear long enough. The time will pass anyway. The years will move anyway. And someday, whether sooner or later, you'll face the person you became. Make sure that person can say one thing with peace. I didn't let fear write my story. I finally decided to write it myself. And when that day comes, it won't be the money that gives you peace. It won't be the applause. It won't be the opinions of people who barely understood your struggles. It will be the quiet knowledge that you didn't give up on yourself. That when life tested you, you answered. That when fear whispered, you kept moving. That when doubt tried to convince you that you were too late, you refused to believe it. Because being lost was never your enemy. Staying lost was. And staying lost doesn't happen because people lack intelligence. It happens because they surrender their power. They stop believing that change is possible. They accept a life that no longer reflects who they are, and little by little, they begin existing instead of living. Don't let that become your story. Not when there is still breath in your lungs, not when there are still dreams inside your heart, not when the future has not spoken its final word. Because the truth is, your life is not behind you. It is in front of you. Even now, especially now. This season may not look beautiful. It may not make sense. It may feel lonely. But some of the greatest transformations happen in silence. Roots grow in darkness. Strength is built in struggle.
And clarity often arrives after the longest nights. So stop asking whether you should believe in yourself. Start asking what happens if you don't. What happens if you spend another year doubting, another year waiting, another year watching life from the sidelines? Because the cost of inaction is higher than most people realize. Dreams don't disappear because they're impossible. They disappear because they are neglected. Potential doesn't die because it wasn't real. It dies because fear convinced someone to stop trying. And maybe that's why you're hearing these words right now. Because somewhere inside you, there is a part that refuses to settle. A part that refuses to accept that this is all life has to offer. Protect that part. Listen to that part. Because that part is fighting for your future. The world will tell you to be realistic, to lower your expectations, to stop believing so much. But history has always been shaped by people who refuse to let disappointment become their identity. People who were rejected, people who failed, people who started late, people who got lost, people who had every reason to quit. Yet they continued. Not because they were fearless, because they decided that regret would hurt more than effort. And one day, you'll understand something that changes everything. You don't become strong when life is easy. You become strong when giving up would be easier, but you choose to continue. That's where character is born. That's where confidence is built. That's where purpose begins to reveal itself. Not all at once, but enough. Enough to take another step. Enough to keep going. Enough to refuse the lie that says your best days are already gone. Because they are not. Your story is not over because you had setbacks. Your story is not over because you made mistakes. Your story is not over because you feel uncertain. The chapter you're in is not the conclusion. And you don't need permission to begin again. You don't need everyone's approval. You don't need to explain yourself to people who cannot see what you see. You only need the courage to take ownership of the life that belongs to you. Because nobody else can live it for you. Nobody else can fight your battles. Nobody else can fulfill the purpose that only you can pursue. And someday, years from now, you'll remember this version of yourself. The tired version. The confused version. The version that almost gave up. And with gratitude in your heart, you'll smile. Because that person didn't quit. That person chose hope. That person chose growth. That person chose to believe that a difficult chapter was not a final chapter. And because of that decision, everything changed. So before this moment disappears into memory, make yourself a promise. Not a promise to be perfect. Not a promise to never fall. Just a promise that no matter how uncertain the road becomes, no matter how slow the progress feels, and no matter how many times life tests you, you will never again become the person who abandons their own dream.